What's going on, everyone? I'm Tello Shelton. This is Coffee with a Bearded Reviewer. And without further ado, let's get started with today's review. Welcome to Coffee with a Bearded Reviewer, everyone. I'm Tello Shelton, and today, folks, we have a very special episode. This is going to be a two-part crossover with these guys that you see right here. So without further ado, how about you guys tell what you guys are all about?
Hello, I am Chad Coffin.
And I'm Brian Stoffel.
And we are the Midwestern Nerds. Brian and I have a love for everything that is nerdy, whether it's comics, movies, TV, sports, video games, Funko Pops, whatever can be nerded out about, we nerd out about. Every Friday, we drop a new podcast, and we are here more than excited to do a crossover with Coffee with a Bearded Reviewer.
Yeah. So great. It's absolutely great to get you guys to be part of this. I'm really excited that we're going to do this in the next video with you guys. So today we are going to review a movie that came out just a little bit more than 20 years ago, the original X-Men. So how about we start off with you guys? What was your personal thoughts when you watched X-Men? Like, your thoughts?
Do we want to start with my opinion when I watched it 2 nights ago with my wife, or 20 years ago when I was 6?
How about you talk about like your experience when you saw it in the theaters and in comparison to how you saw it as an adult?
I'm going to let Brian kick it off because I know Brian, he loves this theatrical. He's got this end covered.
I actually didn't see this movie in the theater. I was
what?
Because I think I was too young when it came out, but I remember the first time I saw this movie, there were some parts that were a little bit freaky and a little bit scary that kind of pushed the PG-13 level. Like if we're dropping spoilers here, when Rogue kills her boyfriend.
They're no longer spoilers. 20 years a spoiler. It doesn't count as a spoiler.
But when Rogue kills her boyfriend right away in the beginning of the movie, the senator being the blob thing, like that kind of freaked me out. Toad. Mm-hmm. Like there were some things that if you were a little kid, it could be kind of scary. But as I got older, I started to appreciate the movie more and more. And while I don't feel like it's my favorite X-Men movie, it's still a good movie, and it's still fun to just watch how that kicked off the superhero movies as a whole.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, I mean, short of Blade, we were really looking at X-Men as a starting point because, we look at a lot of these early on movies, Blade, X-Men, even the first Iron Man. If these movies flop, we're not looking at the decades of superhero movies that followed it, and the MCU told a great story. But again, Blade, especially in the 90s, was one of the first superhero, Blade's an anti-hero. But again, if these movies wouldn't have done as well as they did, we would not have gotten to see your Infinity War, even your Thors, your Captain Americas. They flop early on. We don't get the world that we live in now. Movies.
And viewers here wouldn't be watching this show, or if they would be, it would be completely different content.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, one thing that was just very interesting about my experience when I saw X-Men for the first time, it was at the time, it came out in 2000, so that meant I was 12 years old when it came out. So I was very close to that right age to watch it. Mm-hmm. But this was actually the only movie where I had a bad experience with the audience. Like, I still enjoyed watching the movie, but there was just one guy who was just ruining the movie for me because he would not shut up. That was like the most annoying moment in my life, especially when it came to movies. Like, that he actually had to be escorted out by security.
Wow.
I mean, it was just clear as day that he was wasted. So, I mean, in comparison to how I see X-Men right now and how I see it as an adult, Like, I still thought that movie was so good for what it was. But you're absolutely right. Like, this movie, it really paved the way how we see superhero movies at this point. Like, if this didn't succeed, we wouldn't have gotten movies such as like Doctor Strange, Avengers, like, and yeah, it was really like X-Men and Spider-Man that we really grew up on. So I would not consider this one to be like the best X-Men movie. I would say that my personal favorite X-Men movie has got to be probably a tie between the second X-Men and Logan.
You and Brian will live there. And again, I think I've talked about this in prior episodes, and I'll talk about it here. So one thing for movies for me, while I might not love the most technically sound movies, the most high quality movies, I'm really like that emotional guy, like what attaches to my heart. And even before I saw the original X-Men movies, I saw X-Men Origins Wolverine. And I know, before we just bury me under a pile of rocks, that movie continues to be a movie that I'll go back to for X-Men just because my heart lies in that movie, because it's my first real exposure to on-screen X-Men.
I like that movie just because of the fact that Gambit's is probably my favorite X-Men, and that's the only movie that we get him in that little bit.
Yeah.
That I remember when that movie came out, all of the cool parts that he was in, they showed in the trailers, and I was like, why did I pay to see this movie when I saw everything that I wanted to see before I saw it? But that movie's kind of a train wreck of a movie. There's some things that you can appreciate, like the beginning when they're going through all of the wars.
Dude, I absolutely love that segment. Like, I really thought we were going to get a movie like that, because it felt like that the beginning sequence, especially with all the wars, I thought that was going to be like the theme behind it. But then we got something different. It felt like that we got two different acts.
What are you guys talking about? We got Deadpool.
I feel like that movie, they went into it, they pitched a movie, but they only pitched like half of a movie, and then they were trying to stumble through and figure out what they wanted to do for the rest of that movie.
Yeah. But just to go back onto the original X-Men, I just want to ask you one thing. Do you think Hugh Jackman, Sir Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, I'm sure you guys can't see anybody else play the characters other than them?
Oh, absolutely. And you know, one of the notes I made too, even outside of the movie, I think the way, outside of them just being phenomenal actors, Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart having such that phenomenal bromance, that arguably perfect best friend friendship, played really well into the movie, because
It really did.
Right. If you're not playing a movie with your best friend as your best friend, you can play it really well with your enemy. You know, so those guys play so well off of one another. Just the fact that they're so close and so tight-knit that they can take not only their acting talents, but their relationship and play it off of one another. It just was beautiful for Magneto and Professor X.
I'm going to play devil's advocate. I kind of like James McAvoy and
Michael Fassbender
a little bit better, whereas Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, they definitely resemble and they look to the T the parts of the characters that we grew up loving in the comic books. Yeah. I felt like those movies just didn't really give them enough to do, didn't give them enough to chew on. Those are like top tier actors that had not as much to do, I feel like, as James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender. And I feel like their characters had bigger and stronger arcs in their movies than Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart. So I would say that I like those two better in their movies that they're in. But if you had to ask me like who I picture when I see those characters, I would probably have to say Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen.
Yeah. I would totally agree with you on that. And I think it goes the same thing with Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. Like you can't see anybody else but him play that role.
Oh yeah, that one goes without saying. You know, that one again, like we haven't seen other. I think, and that's the thing too. The reason that the studio didn't do the young or the old, or we'll change things with Magneto or Professor X or Beast or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They had the ability to say Logan never ages, so we're going to continue to use this phenomenal actor who not only looks exactly like our character but acts exactly like him, and who is a perfect incarnation of the Wolverine character. So they never had to like do a younger recasting of him. So I don't know if there's anybody out there who would or could say, I know who would be a better Wolverine, because it wouldn't be the truth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the crazy part is that Russell Crowe was actually offered the role, but he decided not to do that because he apparently was doing the movie Gladiator, and then he just suggested Hugh Jackman, which they're actually best friends in real life. And that's how he got the role, and I thought that was a very interesting way how we got Wolverine. And
it's one of those moments where it's like the best case scenario happened, you know, because Russell Crowe and Gladiator in and of itself is a phenomenal movie, and I couldn't see that movie going any other way without Russell Crowe being the lead actor. And same thing with Hugh Jackman being Wolverine in all the X-Men movies, and especially talking about the first one, which we're focusing on right now. Like, if it wasn't for Russell Crowe being in Gladiator, we wouldn't have had Hugh Jackman be Wolverine in the X-Men movies. And it's the best of both worlds. We got two phenomenal movies, and we got a phenomenal franchise off of just one or two decisions.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said before, I couldn't see anybody else play Wolverine. You can't see anybody else play Magneto or Xavier. But there are a couple gripes that I have about the original X-Men. I think the only gripe I have is just the portrayal of Rogue. Like, I have nothing against the actress who played the role. I just felt like that she was kind of underplayed, because Rogue is meant to be like a very powerful mutant, and they really didn't get the chance to really showcase it. I mean, I grew up watching the animated show back in the 90s. So like I just have like this deep nostalgic love for that show, and it just felt like that they just didn't do her justice. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like the first X-Men movie was kind of like Rogue's origin story. They spent a lot of time focusing on her, and I feel like for that movie, it like they played that role appropriately of this girl who's got these new powers, doesn't know what to do with them, can't touch anybody, and now like her whole world has been turned like upside down.
For goodness, when the movie starts, she almost sexes her boyfriend to death. Like, she starts in a whirlwind, like, and then the movie's like, all right, let's go, time to start the movie.
So in that case, I feel like they did a good job, like, with that, like, kind of transitioning her into that world. I would argue it's the second and the third movie that, okay, like, we got this character to this point at the end of the first movie, but we kind of kept her there for the next two. Like, I feel like she didn't have anything to really do in those movies, and the third one, as awful as it is, I feel like they just used her to be like this is the one mutant that wants to get rid of her powers, and like that we're supposed to be attached to, that it's okay for her to be like, yep, I'm done.
Yeah. I mean, it's understandable, especially for someone like her who has that kind of power. Like, she wants to feel like that. She wants to feel normal, but still somehow feel valid in being a X-Men member. But yeah, I totally agree with you. The third one, even though that one had some problems, I still think that they kind of tackled kind of like a good concept. I just feel like that that there was a lot of potential in the third one. It just felt like that they just didn't execute them right.
Yeah, there's definitely some enjoyable moments in there. I mean, I don't hate watching that movie, like some superhero movies.
Well, and again, we look at it through a lens because, and I mean, I know where we're at with it, and I would assume, Ty, you'd be the same spot. But Brian and I, we love the MCU. And unfortunately, the X-Men fall outside of that. So while some creative teams and some directors may cross here and there, in reality, we have still yet to see what the MCU style quality concept can do with the X-Men, the X-Men. It's because we haven't seen a movie that really exists in our world, in the MCU world. So while we look at all these movies and we're like, man, this one was good, that one was good, but at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't know if I really love one of the X-Men movies the same way I love the MCU movies, and hopefully what we have going on in the future, what we have with with all the rights switching over and crossing and things like that, we see that down the road.
Yeah. So I did want to ask you guys a couple questions, and it's just in regards to like the story itself, and what do you think about like the characters, like where would you guys put this movie in regards to like all of the X-Men movies?
Ooh, I would probably put it more towards the middle. I feel like a few of the newer ones kind of fell flat for me. There's the X-Men Wolverine movie where there's moments in there that I like, but again, I feel like that would go towards the bottom, and X-Men 3 would be in there as well. I think I'd maybe put that right afterwards, because I enjoy First Class a lot. I really enjoy X2. It's hard to put Days of Future Past and Logan. Those I think are kind of tied for me. Both hit different chords with me, but both I feel like are X-Men movies at its peak. I would argue that X-Men Days of Future Past kind of falls into the quality of the MCU movies. Like that was the first, I feel like, Marvel franchise crossover that we had, even though it was like the same franchise. Like you had the older X-Men generation of movies, and then you had the younger ones together, and it took the concept from the books and molded it together so well with these two different franchises, where I feel like after that movie we should have had like a clear X-Men movie like timeline, and it still got muddied somehow. And I feel like, again, if Logan wouldn't have come out, I would have felt like Days of Future Past was the peak of the X-Men movies, because after that, like Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix, those movies they were fine.
Like they were fine. They were fun to watch. They were all right. But again, when you come off of Days of Future Past and Logan, it's hard to follow that up.
Yeah, so I think I would put the original X-Men movie in the middle. Like, and that's kind of how I feel towards that movie too. Like it wasn't the best movie, but it wasn't the worst movie. It's a middle ground movie for me.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It definitely feels like it would be like right there in the middle. I would definitely place the likes of like the first Deadpool, Logan, Days of Future Past, X2, and probably the second Deadpool. I will definitely place those in the top 5 X-Men related movies. But yeah, like the first X-Men, I would definitely place it right there in the middle, just because that it's a classic. Like at this point, it's now a classic, and you can just definitely look back at this movie, and even at its time, its special and visual effects were incredible, and it definitely ages well even to this point.
I will say, and I made some notes. We don't have a lot of video, so I like to gesture to things because we don't do video. But when I watched the movie the other night, I made a couple notes and some things that bode well for the movie over time and do not bode well for the movie over time. One of the first things I noticed was in the first scene with Wolverine, when he's in the cage fighting scene, the pa-ting, pa-ting, whenever he gets hit or hits somebody. And then not only like less than 15 minutes later when he fights Sabretooth, there's no pa-ting, pa-ting. Yeah. So the fact that it's like he's made of metal. He's going to make these noises. And then it's like, okay, but carry it through. So it's one of those cheesy things too. One thing that for me carries over really well, but maybe not in the PC culture, when Wolverine shows up to X Mansion and is like to Charles Xavier, what do they call you? Wheels? Like straight up goes for the guy in a wheelchair and decides to make a joke based off of that. 2000, very topical, very funny. Maybe doesn't age the best, but again, it's really funny. And then the other thing I noticed is that Sabretooth, while they were trying to stay so true to the character, it was such a mess of like true to the character, but he's also still a human. He's got eyebrows that reach his beard. He's got hair that is at one point up and then another point down. So again, this is, while they were trying to stay true to the X-Men and provide a really good movie, there was a lot of early 2000s in this movie, just all over the place.
Yes.
The leather suits.
The leather, yep, the leather suits. And they make a reference to that when they're in the X-Jet in one of the final scenes. Like, would you prefer yellow spandex to Wolverine? As a callback.
I thought that was a nice little nod just to Wolverine's character. Like, you're absolutely right. Like, there are some specific things in this movie that might not work even to this day, but like back in that time, it worked. But like, I just felt like that this movie was still a good movie, even for me to watch it just by itself. It felt like that it just really felt like that they did not like lean so much into like setting it up for a sequel. It just felt like that it was just a movie by itself without any ties to making a second movie. They just made it straightforward.
And not only did they make it like a standalone movie by itself, but they also did a good job of, if you were somebody who, again, like that callback with the white spandex, if you're a comic book fan or a 90s animated series fan, you're like, yep, that's a Wolverine callback. But they didn't make the movie so rooted in that history or that information that the average movie couldn't go, I want to see a superhero movie and go enjoy it, because that is what that movie did provide.
Yeah.
I feel like it added to some of the mythos even early on too. Like, one of the things that I hadn't read too many X-Men comics before seeing this movie. Most of my knowledge came from the 90s animated show, but one of the things that I, even to this day, find fascinating is that, like, Wolverine, whenever he pops his claws, like, he feels pain. Like, they never really addressed that in the comics, to my knowledge, before that point. But I just love the fact that, like, he's got, like, not only is he immortal, but he's got these claws, but he doesn't want to use them because they hurt like hell every time that it's, like, literally ripping out of his hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really loved that little touch of the claws hurting him. I thought that was just a nice little addition to his character, because you're absolutely right. They've never really brought that up in the comic books, but it was just one of those very few things that was just added into the movie that just made it even better.
Absolutely.
Overall, I still think that this movie holds up to this day, and it's a very enjoyable movie to watch. If you just want to, like, have a movie night, you can easily watch this movie. So I just wanted to hear from you guys. What would you say would be like your ratings for this movie?
So I'm telling you right now, Ty, before we get into anything else, it's so hard for me to focus on this podcast we're trying to record, because I'm trying to take in all your surroundings. Like, I'm trying to be like, I'm sorry, is that Thor's hammer? Is that Link's? I'm like, I'm trying to, like, see what's going on in all your posters and stuff. I framed it so well where I'm like, there's none of my basement in here, but there's like 250 pop figures that line these walls.
Oh, really?
I'm trying to, like, zone it in, but I'm losing focus so easily with your nerd dome. I love it.
Thank
I
you.
love what you got going on. That's his last name there on that Batman logo. Did you see that above the TV
Oh
too?
yeah, it's right over there.
Right? LED lit. All right. So overall,
Is this a little bit distracting for you?
Yeah, you got to shut it off. Next time we sit down, you got to pick a Zoom logo that's just black behind you. No, don't do that. I will say it's a movie that I really enjoy. It's a fun movie to watch, but it is not my favorite in the MCU or the X-Men movies as a whole. If we're rating it out of 10, we'll say 10 stars. 10 is a good rating to go off of. 7. I'll give a 6.5, 7 from just the fact that I enjoy the movie. It is accurate to a lot of points, and it does provide not only a fun time to watch it, but also X-Men information for those who don't have any.
I think I would be on a similar ground to you. I kind of am tough when it comes to rating movies.
Kinda.
I can be a little harsh, which is why when I did YouTube back in the day, I kind of veered away from rating movies and just kind of talked about how, like,
you don't have a choice.
The things that I liked about them and the things that I didn't. Now that I have to make a choice, I'm gonna put it probably at like a 6, 6.5.
Okay.
I want it to be a little bit over positive because I do think that it is an important movie and it is a good movie to watch if you want to get into the X-Men movies, if you want to get into the X-Men franchise as a whole. But again, like Chad said, there are more X-Men movies. There are other X-Men movies that I would watch before this. If I had to pick an origin story, I would probably go with First Class before I would go with the original X-Men movie if I had to recommend like a starting point. But again, it's not like it's not a terrible movie. There is a lot of good to it. There's some things that are dated with it, and there are some things that I just never really liked about it. And like that's why I would put it more towards that little bit above middle ground. What about you, Tyler?
I would be. I'm about the same as you guys. I do think that this is a very important movie that led to what we have right now. So like a movie like this, X-Men, Blade, Spider-Man, like if those movies weren't successful, we wouldn't have gotten all the movies that we now have. So like just the fact that this is a very important movie, it doesn't mean that it's like the best, but I still think it's good enough where it's a successful movie that I can still watch it and enjoy it. So I would definitely give it the rating of maybe like a 7.25. I think it's just because I am probably just a little bit biased just because I'm more of a Marvel fan over DC, and I love the X-Men.
Well, it's so hard because, in a world where we live, where there's an Endgame and an Infinity War and all these other movies, I don't want to smash X-Men because I love this movie. We don't want to sit here and pretend that we all didn't love this movie, but we also have to be realistic. A 6.5, close to 7, versus if we say an Endgame, and again, this is maybe a whole nother episode we can have as a 10 or whatever world that would be in. We just have to be realistic,
Absolutely.
I would kind of put this movie as like if you liked Deadpool, if you liked Logan, if you liked the newer X-Men movies like First Class and Future Past, and you wanted to know more, that's when I'd be like, check this movie out and then go like back and appreciate those movies. Mm-hmm. Like that's kind of where that movie sits for me. Like if people want more but don't really know or are too lazy to figure out where to go from what they've already seen, a lot of people do come to me for that kind of stuff. They're like, oh, I really like this. Like, what else is there? And then I'm like, that's when I'd be like, well, if you've seen these other ones, then go back, check this movie out, and then watch X-Men 1, 2, and then 3.
That's good. So do you guys have any last things to say? Because we are going to move on to your side. Overall, I really enjoyed doing this crossover with you guys. I think this is absolutely awesome that we're doing this. Any last thoughts from you guys?
I guess before we kick it out, just a reminder, and I know we've got your listeners on right now. Hopefully they've enjoyed the Midwestern Nerds. Just a couple places you can find us. Again, that's Midwestern Nerds, MidwesterNerds. We are .com. We have a website. Also, we're on Instagram and Twitter. You can catch us on Gmail. And we stream almost anywhere you can find podcasts. And you'll have to find us out because if you want the compelling second half to this podcast, you're going to have to find us on either Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Absolutely. And I'll throw in Facebook too.
And Facebook. Sorry, the MidwesterNerds
well.
Podcast on Facebook as well.
But if when in doubt, just look up MidwesterNerds.com. We have all of our information and ways that you can find us on it as well.
Sounds great. Well, thank you guys so much for being part of this. I will get onto your Zoom meeting, and overall, thank you so much for being part of this. And yeah, if you guys like what you see, press the like button, comment down in the section down below, and if you have not yet subscribed, please do. It really helps us out. And go check out these guys. These guys are awesome. So anyways, without further ado, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you guys next time.